edition of the Ad Podcast. We've got a great guest for you guys today. Jim Boyle is a high-level communications and marketing strategist currently serving as Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at the Better Business Bureau National Programs, BBB National Programs. With a career spanning over 30 years, he's known for his experience in navigating complex regulatory environments and pioneering digital marketing in the public sector. Since joining in 2020, Jim has been responsible for the brand strategy of over 20 industry self-regulating programs, including those focused on advertising and data privacy. In 1990s, he served as a senior vice president of the corporate communications at Discovery. He was a key figure during the company's massive growth period, helping transform Discovery Channel into a globally recognized media powerhouse. Jim was employee number 17 at CNBC, where he established the corporate communications and community relations function for NBC's first foray into cable television. And in 2010, he co-founded Boyle Public Affairs with his wife, Kelly Boyle. The firm has advised over 50 clients, including trade associations, nonprofits, and the American Seed Trade Association. While serving as management supervisor at LMO Advertising, Jim oversaw the $90 million Army National Guard recruitment account. His team is credited with pioneering the use of text, mobile apps, and music videos in early military recruitment. And he served as the president of College Parents of America from 2003 to 2010, becoming a recognized expert on education, technology, and finance. Jim, thanks so much for joining us.
Boy, I must be really old to have done all that.
Well, few notches in the belt, as they say. But, that's a pretty extensive resume in kind of traditional corporate comms at, news organizations and media companies, down to public affairs, to the work that you're doing now with BBB. But why don't you tell me a little bit about your origin story? So where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? And what got you into this line of work?
I grew up in the Detroit, Michigan area in a suburb called Oak Park, immediately north of the infamous 8 Mile Road, the northern border of Detroit. And then upon the recommendation of a high school counselor, I applied to and attended Northwestern University, where I achieved a degree in communications. Then I actually moved out west to LA and worked briefly for an ad agency and a political consulting agency, which offered me the opportunity to work on a congressional campaign in Northern California for a guy by the name of Don Clausen. And on election night, he said, "Why don't you come and work for me in Washington, D.C. as my press secretary?" So I said, okay. and I did, thinking I'd come to Washington for a couple of years and move back to California, which I'd grown to love in a quick period of time. And here I am in Washington, D.C. 45 years later.
Wow, just couldn't get out of the DC metro, huh?
Well, I had a few. The one time I did leave briefly was for the opportunity at CNBC, which was based in the lovely town of Fort Lee, New Jersey, just across the George Washington Bridge from New York. It's now a little bit up the road in Englewood Cliffs, but the CNBC experience was my one time outside of DC since my career began.
Yeah, I love that. So tell us a little bit about that. Employee number 17 at CNBC, kind of the early days of specialization and kind of all the sub news networks that were popping up around the main brands. Now you have a plethora of news channels that are associated with these kind of legacy media brands. But what was it like to be at the ground level of launching a new network?
It was a great learning experience. So the job came to be because when I left Capitol Hill as a press secretary, my first job in media was at NBC News with the very old school sounding title of Washington Publicist, which meant that I promoted Washington, D.C. programming of the news division. So I had to work Sunday through Thursday because on Sundays I went to the office to watch the live broadcast of Meet the Press, take notes, get the transcript, and then feed quotes out to reporters for places like the New York Times and LA Times and others. And so then I heard of an opportunity at the National Cable TV Association, as it was then called, which recognized that people were getting cable TV, not just for the wire to have, a better picture quality in their home, but because they actually found it interesting and worth paying for to have additional channels. And so I had a new job that was created there called Director of Programming Publicity, where my contacts were all the PR directors and VPs, et cetera, at all the new cable networks, HBO, CNN, Discovery. And then that led to NBC getting back in touch with me saying, we're creating a cable network, CNBC, would you like to be involved? And so there was a lot of hubris, I think, on the part of NBC, thinking, we'll launch a network and from day one it'll be successful. But there was competition from a network called FNN, that's long forgotten, Financial News Network, but there was an incumbent, running alongside CNN, but FNN was doing financial news only. It had a very rudimentary stock ticker. It had anchors basically rip and read wire reports. And many cable systems said, well, no one cares about FNN, so we'll drop it and replace it with CNBC. But people that were watching FNN were essentially mostly retired investors. And if you think about it, at the time, there wasn't access to real-time stock information. So they were sitting there and they were watching the ticker. And even though the ticker was about 15 minutes delayed, that was feeding their appetite for what's going on with my portfolio, because there was no other way to get it at the time. And so CNBC's ticker was smaller and also more delayed than FNN's. That was a problem. So cable operators said, sorry, we don't want your channel after all. And so the first year was basically a lot of damage control, fixing the ticker during the day, and then creating some programming at night that was different. And it was an interesting hodgepodge. It was John McLaughlin, who had his own show called The McLaughlin Group. Dick Cavett came out of semi-retirement to host a show. And then, believe it or not, Morton Downey Jr. had a return to television with a show on CNBC. He had a strong syndicated show, and that had been taken off the air. So it was interesting mix during that time. And one of my favorite anecdotes is, and if he's listening, a guy named Al Barber became the president of CNBC. So I was reporting to a guy by the name of Mike Eskridge, and Mike moved on after close to 2 years. And it was like a prequel to 30 Rock. There was a gentleman hired as the president of CNBC named Al Barber. And his principal qualification is that he was a friend at Holy Cross College with Bob Wright, the president of president of NBC. And then he had risen at GE, as Bob Wright had, and was president of the refrigerated rail car division of GE. Then he became hired by NBC to be the CFO of NBC Sports. And that people, I think, raised their eyebrow about that. And then lo and behold, a year later, he was hired to be president of CNBC. And so it was an interesting challenge to explain to him how news publicity worked and to navigate his desire to sort of dictate what the newsroom might cover. And the professionals in that newsroom tended to differ with what his news judgment was.
Yeah, sounds kind of like when CNN hired the guy that was responsible for reality television to run the network at CNN, right?
Yeah. So one of his things was quick anecdote. We were hiring a guy named Dan Dorfman, who had been a USA Today financial columnist, and he had been a commentator on CNN. So it was kind of a big get for CNBC to hire Dan Dorfman, and press releases prepared. The only way I could issue press releases then was at noon on Monday through Thursday through the NBC wire. It was a person in 30 Rock pushed a button and put out all the NBC press releases in a bundle to TV writers in sort of a direct, I don't know, maybe it went through a pneumatic tube as far as I know. But so that was everything from major corporate announcements to who was going to be the guest on the Johnny Carson show that night. So, and my press releases got added to that. So the day Dorfman started, he said, well, is the press release going out today? And I said, yes, at noon. That's when it has to go out. Well, are we announcing it on air on our network? And I said, well, I think there's a plan to do that later in the day. he said, why don't we talk to Peter, the head of news, and let's get it on air this morning. And I'm thinking, oh, well, it's going to be before the press release, but that's okay. No one will really be watching the channel anyway. So I came back to him triumphantly and said, it's going to be on 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. 30-second read, picture of him, all good. And he says, why don't we do a second press release announcing that CNBC has learned exclusively that Dan Dorfman is joining the network. I'm like, I'm like, what? And he goes, no, Boyle, we need to be aggressive about this announcement. I'm saying we would look foolish. It would be like CBS announcing that we have learned exclusively that Mike Wallace has re-signed with 60 Minutes, or that Dan Rather is going to be the anchor of CBS Evening News. He's our own talent. So anyway, he felt that we were missing an opportunity by not making that exclusive announcement.
That's funny. I wonder if you have any commentary as you've watched kind of the landscape of cable, fracture, and then the cord cutting. This is the first year. This is the first year that the television audience has fallen below 50%. So it's now 49% TV, 51%, people getting their news or getting their entertainment packages through online channels versus traditional cable. And then you also have this proliferation of, alternative press and podcasts, and, people can find their information now in 1,000 different corners of the internet. But then when you think about the economic structure, the promise was like, oh, okay, we're going to unbundle all this stuff. And then you just, you pay for internet and then you can pick and choose as you want. And I probably have 30 subscriptions now. Who knows how many? I'm sure it's more expensive than when I used to buy the deluxe, HBO Plus super plan through my cable provider. But do you have any kind of commentary on the landscape? Well, and then the other, obviously, the big news is, Discovery Warner going through their consolidation efforts at the moment, which you had a ground seat at as well. But just curious if you had any commentary there.
Well, I'll try to resist from, keeping on just telling old stories, but it is interesting because I remember working on a press release when cable itself broke through 50% penetration, where then, so when I started in cable, it was only about 40% of households in the US had cable TV. So it was a big deal that became 50%. So I think it's kind of like what's old becomes, new, what's new becomes old. I mean, it's kind of the cycle where there's now, I think there will be a move, and already is, of bundlers trying to figure out how to connect these various streaming services into a package that is attractive for a subscriber. Because I think people, back in the 90s were saying, I don't want all these channels. I just watch, 4 or 5 channels. And that is true, but the economics of the industry were built on the fact that there were these small fees being paid by the cable operator to the channel to be available so that people would have choice. But then, people do fall into their habits of a certain number of channels. So right now, those habits, though, tend to be separate channels that they're having to pay extra for. And so there's an opportunity that I think, is already being starting to take place of bundling those channels and providing a package.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you can go on your iTunes and then subscribe to all the channels through iTunes. You can go on Amazon. You can go on Amazon and subscribe to all the services through Amazon. You can go onto YouTube and subscribe to all the services there. So it seems like you can basically pick any doorway you want to walk through now, and you can basically get all that stuff. And obviously, Amazon wants you to watch it there because then they've got your data for powering advertising and commerce on top of your viewing habits. So they have an incentive to give it away for even less. So it's all It's all data collection in addition to everything else. Yeah, very interesting. Well, so then you jumped over to Discovery. Was that the next stop?
Yeah, and I was employee number 125 there.
Wow.
So when I joined Discovery, it was just one cable channel in the US, Discovery Channel. And the first press release I worked on was the announcement of the acquisition of the Learning Channel which then became known as TLC. And so it gave Discovery another outlet for programming. Also, another interesting thing happened and Discovery changed its name to Discovery Communications, Inc. Also, it was the first year in which Discovery started to produce its own programming. So for the first 6 years of Discovery, all the programming was essentially rented. John Hendricks, the founder of Discovery, very simple idea. He worked in fundraising at University of Maryland, but was a fan of media and loved science and loved watching Universe on CBS in the summer, a special hosted by Walter Cronkite. And he thought, well, there's a movie channel, HBO, there's a news channel, CNN, there's a sports channel, ESPN. I love documentaries. Why isn't there a documentary channel? And so he came up with a name. Now, his first name wasn't very exciting. It was called Cable Educational Network, Inc. And he went to trade shows, had a booth with that name, and people came by and talked, but no one really was buying. And so then he did some deep thinking with a group. This is before I joined, about changing the name, and came up with Discovery Channel, which ended up selling well. And then he launched the channel because there had been documentaries that had been produced and ran on PBS here in the US, but also BBC in the UK, ABC in Australia, CBC in Canada. And there was no way to access them for a viewer. They were just sitting, gathering dust. And so he was able to buy or rent programming, pennies on the dollar, and to fill, a 24-hour channel with lots of interesting documentaries. And then it became to a point where, kind of running those for 5 years, what now? And decided to invest in original programming produced by Discovery, owned by Discovery. And that provided the foundation for the economics to launch Discovery around the world, because then Discovery was able to launch, and that was a great ride in the 90s, on every other continent except Antarctica, although we did a program about that, where we could, where essentially the investment in a documentary with a new voiceover in the local language and maybe some music changes to kind of have the sensibility of the country. The Serengeti is the Serengeti, no matter where you live. And so the nature documentaries in particular, were very popular around the world, and it enabled Discovery to grow quickly around the world.
Yeah, it's almost like if you have a Brit or a Kiwi or an Australian narrating the program, it actually feels more authentic, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly what happened.
So
there I did have, I guess, one other thing worth mentioning, and is that's where I knew Mark Burnett before he was Mark Burnett.
Yeah, he was. Wasn't he a helicopter pilot from Oz or something like that?
Well, no, he was actually he was a UK paratrooper. So he grew up kind of in the East End of London, and then served in the military. Came to the U.S. He had participated in an adventure race after he got out of the military, something called La Raid Gaulois, a French adventure race held mostly in Africa, and then had some television coverage in Europe. And when he got to the U.S., he first, to make some money, he sold tchotchkes in Venice Beach, and then he became a manny working in Beverly Hills. But then he decided to create his own adventure race in Moab, Utah, and he pitched it to cable networks, and MTV bit and ran it in sort of 15-minute segments one year, and it got a decent rating for MTV. It was sort of, something different besides just running 24 hours of music videos. But then he came to Discovery with a concept, let's call it Discovery Channel Eco Challenge. And so it was an adventure race in different locations around the world, teams from around the world, in which they navigated, challenges in Australia, Morocco, Argentina, in very remote places. And he had the credibility to produce that because he could go scout the course based on what he had done as an adventure racer himself. And so 2 years in, he then came to Discovery and said, I've got another idea. And I was in the room for this. And he pitched Survivor. And he looked around the room, and the answer was no. Discovery turned it down. Now, I mean, I don't think Survivor would have become, at least immediately, the big hit that it became by being on a network. But,
Yeah, you kind of needed
obviously,
it to be on a top tier
yeah,
cable
needed.
provider. Yeah.
I think it worked better because it was on a network. But nevertheless, so and then the rest was history, of course. Uh, but
Yeah,
it
that's
was
pretty
so
wild.
it was
I have
interesting to
his
know him back at that
that's
time.
that's cool. I have his biography up here on the shelf somewhere.
Oh, well,
You've just inspired me to pull that off the shelf and
yeah.
actually finally read it. So
Mhm.
um, cool. So you spent these couple of years in cable TV in the communications department, and then prior to that, you had spent time on Capitol Hill doing public affairs. Um, what kind of led you into this world of trade associations, trade organizations? I've done a little bit of work in advertising,
Right.
in not in politics, but in like public affairs, right? Where you go and you don't have to pick a party. You can work with, the APAC, and you can work with National Petroleum Institute, and you can work with the, Sugar Growers Association. Like
Mhm.
there's all these trade associations that are all lobbying Capitol Hill, but occasionally they want to get messaging out to the broader public to, drive policy or drive awareness about an issue. And I found that to be, a very lucrative space where you don't have to get into campaigns or pick like left or right. But what brought you? You had obviously worked in some campaigns during your younger years. What kind of
Right.
got you involved in this world of like the trade associations, and
Well, at
what
first,
brought you into that
yeah.
space?
Well, first it was this, I heard about the opportunity at the National Cable TV Association. And so while I was at NBC, then I learned about this director of programming publicity role at NCTA, getting to work with all these new cable networks. So that was my first entree into it. And then,
I got it. So it was almost
yeah, I
very
was
kind
at
of logical
NBC.
from where you're
Yeah,
coming from.
then CNBC was launching a cable network, so I went there. And then I moved on to Discovery because I wanted to be back in the DC area. I'd gotten married. My wife was from the DC area, and we had fun in New York, but preferred to be back in the DC area to hopefully raise a family, which we did. And Discovery was based in Bethesda, Maryland. And so then Discovery became very closely allied with the National Cable TV Association because Discovery was a great story to tell on Capitol Hill. Because back in those days when you took cabs, you'd meet a cab driver and they'd say, "Well, I don't watch much TV, but I watch Discovery Channel or I watch PBS." So everybody loved, maybe I'll say it in the past tense, Discovery Channel at that time. So the National Cable TV Association recognized that education and documentaries, for the most part, were a great way to show Capitol Hill that we're doing important things that people want to watch and that are helping them learn. We're sort of a companion to PBS. In fact, we often had shows that would air on both PBS and then on Discovery or the Learning Channel. So there was much more of a cooperative arrangement than with PBS, the first ever kind of arrangements like that. So then fast forward, with that experience of working as a staff member at NCTA, when I decided to, with my wife, go on my own and open a public affairs consulting firm, that was kind of a lot. I was aware of the impact of trade associations and, thought there was great opportunity, and there is, to work with trade associations to tell their message and to, help them understand, the media role in that, but then and other ways to tell their message more directly.
Yeah, that's interesting. How'd you meet your wife? Was she in the industry? Did you meet her through did you meet her through professional circles? Because it sounds like she obviously had to have credibility and credentials to join you as the co-partner, right?
Well, we met working for, so that first member of Congress I mentioned, Don Clausen from Northern California, he lost in 1982. So I had to find another job. And I was working then for a member who's still alive today. He's now retired, Frank Wolf from Northern Virginia. And so my Kelly Malloy joined our staff in the district office, which is in McLean, Virginia, where I'm sitting right now, outside of Washington, D.C. And on a Friday evening in August of 1984, the administrative assistant, as the top staff members were called then for members of Congress, put his political hat on and said, there's a booth at the Arlington County Fair that we don't have anybody to work tonight. Can you do that? And then he also called Kelly and said, can you help Jim Boyle do that? And so we were both working for Frank Wolf, but hadn't met. So then we show up to work at this Arlington County booth for the Republican Party. And there weren't a lot of people interested in talking to us that night at the Arlington County Fair. And so we had a chance to meet and get to know each other. And the rest was history. It sounds very bucolic, Arlington County Fair, but it was essentially a series of booths in a community center in Arlington, Virginia, and people were walking up and down, taking brochures and asking questions. And in the case of the Republican booth, kind of looking askance at what we were doing there.
How many years did you run your PR firm or your public advisory firm?
Well, Kelly's still doing it, so there's still
cool.
Boyle Public Affairs still exists, and she's the principal and has a couple of core clients. But we did it together, so I know my career is very eclectic, but we had both then worked subsequently, me for L&O Advertising, and she worked directly for a couple of other associations. And then we decided we had both had kind of individual clients that wanted to work with each of us. And we decided, well, now's the time to kind of open our own business, because we'd be jumpstarting it with two core clients that we could build from. So we started doing that in 2011. And then in 2020, BBB National Programs, I was hoping to pitch them as a client, but one thing led to another, and I decided to go in-house working for this organization, because in a way it's sort of an in-house agency, because we have a collection of industry self-regulation programs that are in advertising, privacy, dispute resolution, and things like the auto industry. So they have different business challenges and need different types of marketing and communication support.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we talked a little bit offline about a program that you guys are rolling out in the influencer space, but first I want to talk about the BBB's kind of more national mandate, or their international mandate. So, it's funny, as a consumer, you always see like BBB accredited, on people's websites. And it's like this thing like, oh, I can trust this company because they've gone through some certification or some steps to put this on their website to be able to say like, okay, they're legitimate. But that's probably the main way that the consumer thinks about the BBB. So I'd be curious, from your perspective, what does the organization do? How does it protect and interact with the public, and how does it serve its constituents?
Well, I've been going back, many years with some of my stories. I'll go back really far with this one, just as a quick preface. And that is that the Better Business Bureau and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, coincidentally, were both organized in 1912 in parallel tracks. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was created to advocate for business, and the Better Business Bureau was created to sort of be the watchdog of business, making sure that businesses were acting responsibly. And it came out of a period where there's a lot of questions about business activity and a lot of scandals and trust busting, the whole trust busting era. And so then with local businesses, Better Business Bureaus, it created a federated model where each city could create a Better Business Bureau, kind of following the rules, the charter set in Washington, and then how a business should behave to be accredited, to give trust to a consumer that they're dealing with a legitimate business. Then fast forward to 1971, the major advertising associations, ANA, which represents the brands, 4As, the agencies, and others, came to the Better Business Bureau and said, we've got a problem. Ralph Nader, who was taking on the auto industry and is most well known for that, was also taking on consumer culture. And he was advocating for the creation of a cabinet level department to monitor advertising in the US. Now, the Federal Trade Commission already existed, but he wanted a model that was being put in place in other Western democracies, where ads were approved before they could go on air or before they could run in like a national magazine. And the industry, of course, was not thrilled with that idea. So they
I can
basically
imagine.
they came to the Better Business Bureau and said, "What can we do?" And so the Better Business Bureau, which is focused on this concept of self-regulation, that businesses should do the right thing as a minimum, and as an industry should collectively want to do the right thing by consumers. And so they came up with this government sounding agency kind of program, National Advertising Division. So that's our longest running program. It's been around since 1971, and it referees on truth in advertising. So its competitors can bring a challenge to an ad by another company, and then we rule on whether the ad is truthful or not. And we have advertising lawyers who, in effect, serve as the judges, the forum. And then that system has gained credibility in the 1970s, and still today, it's a very credible system that's used, by hundreds of companies every year to referee advertising disputes. And since then, the concept has then been applied to privacy issues and companies navigating those issues, and then in dispute resolution programs in other industries. Also, the ad programs have now grown to include children's advertising, which has kind of
like COPA compliance and stuff like that.
Yeah, that has a landscape of its own. And so we have something called the Children's Advertising Review Unit that follows those issues closely.
And then you mentioned that a lot of times that these complaints are brought on by a competitor. So say, Pepsi does something and Coke doesn't like it. So Coke brings it to the table and then you guys kind of serve as mediators. Is it generally only other advertisers that bring complaints, or can it also be brought by consumers or other interested parties?
All of the above. But generally, the consumers, I mean, our attorneys can do their own monitoring of the marketplace, but of course, that's kind of hard to, it's like catching everybody who runs a red light. I mean, but there are cases or ads that are brought to our attention through a wide variety of sources, and then we kind of try to do a quick assessment, and in many cases do bring a monitoring case against a company and write them a letter and say, we noticed this. And sometimes they say, well, who are you to tell us what to do? But then if they look under the covers just a bit, or contact a lawyer, they're usually told, well, yeah, you should pay attention to this, because even though we have a voluntary system, it has some teeth to it, because if they don't follow what we suggest, we can then refer them to the appropriate government agency, or sometimes the state attorney general, depending on the nature of the case.
And do those those infractions or cases or whatever you want to call them, do they generally have to do with claims, like a product saying that it can do certain things that maybe they can't actually prove, or saying things that aren't based on research or actual R&D? Like would you mind giving me maybe a couple of interesting cases that pop to the top of your head that you've had to deal with? And you may or may not mention the guilty party. I'll leave that up to you.
Well, I mean, once the case is published, it's public knowledge. So
right.
I mean, I think one interesting one over the past few years is a meat company called JBS, which is headquartered in Brazil, but has over the years come to have a huge U.S. operation. And they're in like every phase of the meat business, from owning land where cattle grazes, to the slaughtering the cattle, to then moving it to market, all the way to to being sold at grocery stores. And they were making claims. So most of our work is done on ads that are either run on TV or digitally or in print. But in this case, it was claims that they're making in their annual report and in other on their website about how climate friendly their policies were. And here I'm sort of struggling to remember so I'll just leave it at that. Sort of generally, they were making claims about their positive impact.
Some people call this term greenwashing.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Okay. It was in the nature of greenwashing. And so then we that was a monitoring case where we went to them, and at first they basically ignored it. And we said again, hello, we're interested in how you can substantiate these claims. And then it came to be that they were not able to substantiate their claims of being great for the planet, and that they agreed to, change them. Now, that's another challenge for us, though, is following up with companies who promise to do things to making sure they actually did them. And in this case, though, because the work that we do gets published and is recognized as legit by government authorities, the state of New York, the state attorney general, Letitia James, then sued JBS for fraud, and it got widely covered. And in her filing, cited our case that the National Advertising Division had shown that you're making this up. And so then they took it seriously when Letitia James brought that claim. And so that's one example. I mean, there are all sorts of examples that a lot of them are in, like, where there's a disruptor in a category. There've been claims recently on, I'll do the ear cleaning devices, and claims about teeth cleaning, which I could probably use some myself, but where making sweeping claims about the ability of strips or whatever, and then a competitor watches those ads and says, how can you prove that claim? And so then the way the system works for the most part is they then file a challenge with us, challenging the ad of the competitor, and then we receive that and then notify the competitor that the advertiser that their ad has been challenged, and then we essentially then referee the dispute, where we allow each to send a body of information, either making the case why the ads are legit, or making the case of why they should be, ruled to be not legit. And then we weigh that, and then we make a decision. And then if they don't like the decision, we actually have our own kind of interesting appeals process, the National Advertising Review Board, which is made up of non-lawyers. So there we have 90 some. We have we have advertising professors, not ad law professors. We have advertising executives. We have retired advertising executives. We have people from brands, people from agencies, and we impanel a small group to listen to the appeal. And they receive a huge packet of information and read it all. And then they're guided by an attorney, through the intricacies of the legal process, and they decide whether our original decision was right or wrong. And then still, if the party is still not happy, they may say we're not going to comply, and that's where we have the stick of being able to refer to the Federal Trade Commission or the Food and Drug Administration or to a state attorney general.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we talked about an example of like white strips, for instance, and making claims. I wonder, how much do you guys look into the actual creative process? So I would think in that example, like, you could say that your white strips make your teeth whiter.
Right.
But then you could actually go into the film and editing tools and make the teeth whiter, with technology, versus the strips actually doing the work for it. So,
right.
Is it ever an instance where you have to kind of evaluate like how the ad was created and how they, made this effect essentially? Like, was the effect natural? Does it show natural usage of the product, or are you using special effects or things in the creative toolkit to exaggerate claims or make it more more visually exciting, I suppose, is a way to say it.
I mean, again, I hate to have it be an all of the above answer, but it sort of is. I mean, so it really depends on but we try to follow what the challenge is. Like so the challenge has a specific questions or claims about the ad that it shouldn't, it can't say that it's the best, because how do they really prove that? And what study has shown that? And so ads do really need to have sort of citations to them. They're often not presented necessarily on the ad itself, but there's an undergirding to the claims that are made. Claim substantiation, which is sort of a jargony word, but that's really what it's mostly about, the substantiation of what is said in the ad, and is it true, and is it based on reliable evidence.
Yeah. Be curious how much you guys are thinking about AI in the creative process now. The idea that, for a long time, advertising was at least made by film and then maybe altered in the editing room. But now you've got this new technology that can basically create video, create still imagery, create all of these things from scratch. How important do you think that innovation and technology will be to, your guys' business as a regulatory body or an association rather, but that has regulatory teeth at you to explain these different instances? Right. What do you guys think? What are you guys seeing, and how are you guys thinking about AI in the advertising world?
Well, I mean, there's several ways to think about it. I mean, one, within the context of this national advertising division and cases, there are, and to use the phrase that you first brought up, greenwashing, there is something, that started to be called AI washing. I mean, interesting with AI washing, though, it kind of cuts both ways. With greenwashing, it's like making claims about making the environment better, but you're not really doing that. With AI washing, sometimes it's making claims about AI, but not really being able to substantiate them. And sometimes it's not revealing that AI is being used, or sometimes it's overstating the impact of AI in the creation of whatever the product may be. So it's rather complicated to navigate that. I mean, one thing, we will always want to adjust to changes in the marketplace. And so we are looking as to how we can apply our mission, which is to help businesses to enhance consumer trust, and in this age of AI. And so one area we're looking at is AI chatbots. So we've created something, the AI Chatbot Accountability Initiative, in which we're hoping to bring all the major players who are involved with chatbots and to recognize that there is a problem, that there are stories that several were reported just in the last week of young people, but not just young people, adults too, who develop relationships with chatbots, and tragedy follows. And so what to do about that? And so we're hoping that all the players who are involved in the creation of these chatbots would agree to kind of a set of guardrails that would be for the purpose of recognizing now, before it's too late, that of the problem that is being caused. I mean, I would compare it to right now there's also court cases that have been being decided recently on social media companies and the impact of social media and addiction, and the impact of mental health of kids. Well, AI is just taking that now to an nth degree. And so, we are urging the companies that are involved in the creation of these AI products to work in a self-regulatory way to try to deal with this problem before it is exacerbated.
Yeah, that's super important. Yeah, I think especially for some of the high-profile stories that we've heard that have ended in bad situations for parents, especially. Yeah. Quickly changing gears a little bit to the parent conversation. You spent, I think it was from 2003 to 2010 as the president of the College Parents of Americas. You are a higher ed expert. Higher ed is facing a lot of tailwinds right now. You've got a smaller group of consumers, right? So the birth rate has declined. There's less people, to go to college in the current moment. You've got the baby boomers being the largest generation moving into retirement, but a smaller generation backfilling them because of declining birth rates and, anti-immigration policies of the current administration. And then at the same time, you've got the cost of college. College is becoming more expensive than ever, but then also, then in the same moment you see, endowments are as big as they've ever been. And then also parents, questioning the cost with this AI boom and 25% of the current grads out of work. Parents are also questioning not the value, but at least thinking about I feel like when I grew up, you got into the best college you could get into, and
Right.
you and your parents moved heaven and earth to get you to go to that school. That was just how it was. And then I think now both students and parents are at least thinking about value and thinking about cost as part of the equation. Be curious, as someone who spent a lot of time thinking about higher ed, do you have a point of view on kind of where the higher ed institution in general in America, from all those different factors that we mentioned, what's the state of play, in your opinion?
Well, I mean that's a very long answer, but I guess to boil it down, I mean I think you set the you set it up well. I mean I'd say that college career placement offices used to be treated as kind of a joke at colleges and universities. They're kind of like, oh yeah, did you hear the career office? Not really. Like, what do they do? And kind of a backwater of the university. And now, but I think now there's a recognition that the value of a college education that colleges understand they need to prove that. They need to prove it to the student and the parent. They recognize that, so part of the reason I got helped, a guy who had created College Parents of America get it up and running, was that a recognition that parents his view was his sons had gone to Princeton and Syracuse. He wrote lots of big checks, but he had really little clue as to what he was getting for his money. And he felt that the universities were kind of brushing him off, didn't want to answer his questions, and that had an attitude, oh, that's private. That's covered by the Federal Education Records Act, FERPA rules. Can't tell you. Your child has to give express permission for me to give you his grades or his medical, what's up with a medical issue. So he was frustrated by that and thought there should be greater interaction between parents and schools. So fast forward to now, I think schools get that now. They understand that in recruiting a student, they're also recruiting a parent.
You have to be partners with the parents.
It's not a rhyme like happy, wife, happy life, but happy parents, they're going to pay the bill on time, and the child will, the young adult will more likely to stay at that school, get a degree, become a supporter of the school. But then tied into that is a job, what happens afterward, or the ability to ready themselves for what's next. And so colleges and universities, first were, kind of making these, a liberal arts college would say, oh, and we've got a connection with a coding school, and we offer you you can get a coding certificate to connect with your degree in English. And then that means you're now prepared for the world because all the jobs are in coding. Well, that's changed. But wherever jobs are, the colleges and universities recognize they need to be a place where there's an opportunity to get those jobs, whether it be in a local community or in the field in which the school concentrates in.
Yeah, that's smart.
That's kind of a random answer, but it's complicated.
No, I think it's true. I think it's true. I mean, when I went through the system in the early 2000s, it was very much, I went through the UC system. It was a great system, and I really enjoyed my college experience. But, like you said, very little on the career preparedness front. I was lucky enough to do 3 internships during my junior and senior year. So I was pretty well, on the track, so to speak, as I graduated. But, now with California actually made it illegal to have free internships. You have to pay minimum wage. And I think to some degree I can understand there, because you're giving people who can afford to work for free an advantage over those that can't. Right. There's probably a dynamic there that was important, but you also eliminated a lot of opportunities for, potential students to, learn for free, essentially.
Right.
So I see both sides of it for sure. But I think, parents want to know, if I send my kid to this school, yes, I want them to have a great social experience. I want them to be safe. I want them to learn, but I also want to know that they're going to have opportunities and that it's worth their
Right.
time. And it's not just money. It's actually, now a lot of students are looking at it as time, right? You're taking 4 years when you're young, a young adult, when you're the least attached, you have the least burdens on you financially, and you're basically loading those things onto you, where you could also take a lot of risk during that time and be,
Right.
an entrepreneur or something like that. So
Right.
yeah, very interesting. All right, I want to spend a little bit of time on what we talked about with the work that you guys are doing with FTC and influencer
Yeah.
education and the idea of disclosures, because there's a lot of people who are from a lot of people who tune in to the show are from the creator economy, based on the 9 years that I spent squarely in the middle of that ecosystem working for an influencer agency. So the FTC guidance, from the very beginning up to current time, it's always been something that companies bake into their contracts, but at the end of the day, it generally falls on the creator. Well, you maybe tell me. I think that
Yeah.
the agency kind of wipes their hands clean with the contracts. The brand has some culpability. The creator has some culpability. But ultimately, if an influencer doesn't follow FTC disclosures, what are some of the potential recourses that can happen?
Well, I mean, there are legal consequences if they don't, for both the influencer and for the brand. But then I think it's more about the responsibility that every party has to ultimately to the consumer. And so it's, a brand should want to present to the consumer truthful information about their product or service. The agency should, if kind of apply the same principles as traditional ads. It's just a new way of doing advertising. And so, as I've talked about earlier, we've been refereeing ad disputes for 55 years now. So it's just kind of recognizing that a way for us to add value as an organization would also be to educate at the front end, to provide an opportunity for this new form of advertising to be done the right way, and to offer creators who want to serve as influencers, a course that just helps them recognize there is something called the FTC endorsement guides, and provide them a look at all the different scenarios about disclosures of a connection to a brand when they're making a post about a brand or doing a video about a brand, all those things. And it rolled up into what ended up being a 50-page script, a 90-minute course in which those scenarios are walked through. And we were lucky enough that one of the creator platforms, #paid, sees the value in this and allowed their creators to kind of be the beta testers for us of the course. Was it done in a way they could understand? And we got great feedback. And so this week we launched it.
Amazing. And then is that essentially going to be the plan to roll out, is to leverage the platforms, because they are essentially the pipes of the industry through which creator content travels through brand to the end user. Essentially, they're a great place because they have these massive suppositories and databases of creators, and that's a good place to offer this as an opt-in. And then almost to some degree, the creator at some point can put this on their profile or on their blog or their website and say, hey, I'm a Better Business Bureau certified, creator, for a lack of a better word. That's like, it'll be something that they can use as currency to make, there are some brands that are very Wild West and cowboy about this stuff. And then there are some brands that are very, very strict about, you could think of the obvious suspects, right? Pharmaceuticals, financial, B2B, like those guys don't mess around. So I could see a world in which brands would say, oh, if these groups of creators have gone through this course, or this platform certifies that they offer this, or they have a badge on their profile, and I can select or filter based on this criteria, then that gives me an extra level of comfortability recruiting these creators, that they're going to, not get me in hot water.
Yeah, you've got it. That's what it's all about. I mean, so we hope that everyone in the ecosystem will embrace it. But it starts though, I think, with the brands, because the brands are sending a message to creators that encouraging them to get certified if they want to be hired by that brand. That'll go a long way, because it should just offer it. If it's a nice to have, we'll get some creators that will want to be, do the right thing. But it's much stronger as a driver for them to sign up if it's a must have. If it's seen as, I've got to do this if I'm going to be successful as an influencer. And so we hope that, and so platforms really, I think, are kind of the perfect place to start to create the foundation for this, because as #paid presents on that platform, they connect brands with influencers. And so, from day one, we're launching with a relatively small number of influencers who are now certified. It's in double digits, but we hope that will go to triple digits and then, take off as brands recognize the importance of this. And you mentioned a seal. So they will, after taking the course, we then have a connection with Credly, which is a platform that offers all sorts of credentials, Adobe or whatever technical skills one might gather. And then they receive a seal that says trained in responsible influence. So it's the responsible influence certification program. But we received advice from our former FTC officials who work here that in isolation, the seal, they'll be going too far to say certified, that we have to explain what that means. So it's trained in responsible influence. And then the copy explains that it's a certification program that is intended to show brands, agencies, and then ultimately the consumer that this is a trustworthy individual.
Yeah, very cool. Well, Jim, I enjoyed this interview. I gave you my naivete of like what I know about the BBB just as a consumer, seeing it pop up, like trusted by the Better Business Bureau on, I mean, it's funny, like a lot of advertisers use your endorsement in their ads because they want to actually promote that. So that's kind of how I am familiar with it from a consumer perspective.
Yeah.
But as someone that's been in the advertising and media industry for 25 years, I didn't realize the history in which the BBB has with the other organizations like ANA and 4As and the partnership there, and how they are part of that self-regulating body of keeping us all honest and making sure that the work that we do in this industry stays above board, as they say. So thank you for the education, and thank you for spending some time walking us through your exciting career. If folks want to follow along with your thinking, connect with the BBB, follow along with this FTC or this influencer certification and training, where would you like the audience to follow along and learn more?
Well, they should go to responsibleinfluence.org. That's a website that explains, it's a microsite within the Center for Industry Self-Regulation that we've created or what we're calling incubating this new self-regulation program. And they can also contact me if they would like directly, J Boyle, JBOYLE at bbbnp.org.
Amazing. Well, Jim, thanks for spending some time with our audience today. And for those of you who are watching at home, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you're listening to the show, an honest review on whatever platform you might be listening on gives us a wider reach. So don't forget to do that. And last but not least, if there's a brand marketer out there that wants to get a little bit tighter on their FTC compliance with influencer marketing, or somebody in the advertising industry who you think would be interested in learning kind of the history of the BBB and its association with our space, or just somebody who you think would benefit or enjoy the interview that I had with Jim today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, Jim, I will wish you a nice evening. Appreciate you spending some time with us.